Thank you, guys. First of all, I'd like to thank OCAC for giving me a bed to put my head on every night. Just been very, very good. And then, of course, Jeff and Amy for the space, and Ling for organizing all these things. And a lot of great people I've been meeting the last few days I'm here. Okay, I'm gonna start with about myself, just a little bit. I'm 61 years old now. I got into punk rock when I was 14. That was 1978. Okay, that's where it began. Okay, but before that, I wanna play a short video of what I am doing now after all these years. I used to be a journalist for a newspaper. I mean, two newspapers basically. In the 90s, I was reviewing music, and I had a weekly column called Blasting Concept, which is all about the music, underground music in Malaysia. So that column come out weekly, every Wednesday, and then it's a full page, and it's about independent bands, so mainly about the DIY scene. Doesn't matter what you do in terms of your stylistic or your style of music, but So anyway, that one goes for 1998. After that, I stopped and I become a freelance designer. I started my own company slowly. And then about 2 years ago, I stopped all that now, and I'm concentrating on this thing that I've been trying to do for a long, long time, while playing in my band and also organizing shows and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm gonna play the video that I have here. Forgot my spec. Can't see now, eh? So this is my space in KL. Okay, so that's what I'm doing now, basically. It's called the Rice Cooker Archive. It started from a blog that I did in the late 90s called the Rice Cooker website, where you can see all the next gigs and reviews, and which is the follow-up to the Blasting Concept column, which I stopped in 1998. It became a shop for 5 years, and then now it became an archive. So those things, the whole archive is going to be moving to North Borneo now, because that's where I'm living currently. All right, so let's start with the presentation. Okay, what we're gonna do today is I'm just going to give it because I've been involved in the scene ever since the very, very beginning, so I cannot help but talk about myself a bit. I hope you guys don't mind, because most of the time I'm always been involved in this thing. So let's go to the first one here. Okay, this is basically a background to rock and roll in Malaysia or Malaya at that time. And rock and roll, from my point of view, for this, I'm framing it as the main umbrella before everything else underneath it, from whatever styles it is. So we have like among the first recording that I want to just play a bit because I don't want to take too much time. I can go on forever with this. That's the thing. So this is by Julia. It's put out somewhere in 1954. So one of the first early rock and roll, and it's a cover of Bill Haley's and the Comets hit. Hold on.
2 jam 3 4 lompat, malam jam 7 8 jalan, lalu jam 11 12 pas mari gelek gelek, jauh malam 1 dan 2 3 4 5 6 7 dan 8, mari kita bersama melompat mengikut tempo, jangan cepat entah kiri ke kanan sambil pusing badan. Kalau menari joget baru jangan.
I'm gonna stop now. Okay. So basically, those days, the bands in the 40s and the 50s, in terms of the more modern kind of influences, because as you guys have to remember, we were under the British rule for a long time. So around this time, the British is still there. They just got off the trip because we got our independence soon after this. About 3 years after this, we got our independence in 57. And to do, I think people start to play rock and roll because it's trendy at that time. But because usually this Miss Julia, as she's known, she usually play big band, jazz kind of thing. And also even our biggest star, I don't know whether you guys know this name, P. Ramlee or Ramlee Puteh. He's like the icon of all icons, because he did music and he also directed film and make his own film and everything. He also had to kind of like cater to the market in a sense, and he did also several rock and roll songs. This is like later around the later 50s and the early 60s. In the case of what I'm talking about, which is basically subcultures, and subcultures is when you the young people of a certain area suddenly got their own life away from the parents. Different dressing from the parents, different music. They have their own lifestyle. So that's totally independent for what the parents were before, or even the older ones before. And this started out, of course, right after the war, and then it became bigger and bigger. And then in 1961, at that time, there were already like bands who were trying to be like The Shadows, Ventures, and all those bands that were playing instrumental guitar rock, mainly like surf music, garage, and things like that, but no vocalists. But anyway, 1961, November 5, if I'm not mistaken, Cliff Richard, I don't know whether you know, guys, maybe you guys too young to know about Cliff Richard. Cliff Richard is like a huge pop star back then in England. And he went to Singapore and Malaysia, played 2 shows there, big shows, like thousands of people. But anyway, he brought along with him as the band that's backing up him, The Shadows, which is like the icon of instrumental rock at that time. So all these bands who were around already at that time look at this thing and they thought, wow, we should, instead of playing instrumental all the time, let's get a singer too. So that created a new trend in that sense. Like that time they call it beat, beat music. For P. Ramlee, he called it kugiran, meaning kumpulan gitar rancak, meaning a group of loud guitar or energetic guitar. So anyway, then early 1965, there was a single that put out by this band called the Mods. And because at that time, that sort of music is still not that popular. I'm going to play this song. This is called Susanna, sung by Amos Mann, which was at that time was a kind of like a small star, very famous too in terms of the TV shows and everything in Singapore. And of course, You have to remember Singapore and Malaysia around that time they are still the same because they come together in 1963. Okay, so let's play the song. This is like really huge because when I talk to the rockers that come out in the 70s even, they say what made them want to start a band was because of this song. Okay, let's get back to the common, how to say, cultural values of those days. At that time, pre-late 70s, everything is quite permissible in that sense because it's a more kind of almost culturally very liberal society in that sense because the remnants of the British were still there. To the point that you can go and see triple X films at the cinema, things like this. Also. So in terms of the arts, also things was really happening in films and of course in terms of music, with all these bands and stuff. But that became very different by the late 70s. Oh, I don't know why it goes there. Okay, so the explosion of those bands, started in some ways also because a part of it is because of the Vietnam War. Happening in Vietnam at that time, because the Americans, the GIs, the Marines would go for the holiday. I mean the off days, R&R they call it. They go to Bangkok, they go to Subic Bay in Manila, and they go to even Taiwan, from what I heard, and also in Singapore. So everywhere they go, they bring that music, and then they will ask. They need bands to play live. Sometimes they do it themselves, themselves, but then slowly they start getting the local bands to play. And also the drugs come along with it. That's a part of the culture. I have here, what is it again? So these guys, the Swallows, they are like my all-time favorite band in that sense because they were, how to say, very, very raw, and they're not singing in Malay. They're singing in Boyan language, which is like a sect of people in Sumatra where they come from. So, but they were like the wildest bands, and they would play everywhere in the peninsula of Malaysia in the 60s, even to my parts, which is on the on the more conservative side of things, they were there too. Okay, let's go on from the 60s, let's go to the 70s. I'm just going through briefly what's happened in the 70s now. So, in the 70s, as usual, 1968, 69, you got the hippies happening in all over, basically starting in the US and the UK and everything, coming from the beatnik era. And that also happened in Malaysia, or actually in India also. I got a book about 2 years ago about writing about this and the music scene there, how it was influenced by a lot of the hippieism. And Pulau Pinang, which is one of the islands, the bigger island on the west side of northwest side of Semenanjung, Malaysia, the peninsula, was the central point where they go when they are going down to Bali because they have a trail coming from Tehran going down to India, Goa, and then go down to Penang and go into Bali. That what is called as a hippie trail. So basically, Malaysian musicians at the time, the young people, was pretty much very influenced by the American or the Euro-American kind of trends that happening that time. And in the 70s, one of the biggest bands, later on become really because the biggest band is these guys. They were called Blues Gang, and they're like a blues rock band. And this is from their first album.
Before I go, how much time, just don't know. I said last time before I go, lots of things we have to show.
Okay, that was Blues Gang, and Blues Gang was. I mean, even now they're still playing. Some of them died, but they're still doing shows and things. But like many other bands in Malaysia, when they got signed to a record label, they got changed. The record label would change them to become more soft and more not as rugged or rough anymore, and become very well accessible to the normal public. But anyway, one of the main things that become, the government started to crack down on young people was this festival. It's actually called Camp Semangat Festival. Camp Semangat is the name of the Camp Semangat camp. And it's a 3-day kind of festival with bands from Singapore, Thailand, and everything. And then at first, it was actually opened up by the mayor of Kuala Lumpur, the main city. The mayor went there to open up this show, like to officiate the show. But by the third night, there were, there's drugs and stuff start flowing already, and then the bands, and the pushback immediately from the press and the people from after that, and the government kind of started to like really go against these people. Long hair, then you can't do certain things, cannot do this, cannot do that, And the way the fashion that you wear, they start looking all that. I mean, they call it like something that very negative, and it's been called as yellow culture or something like this. I still don't understand why they call it yellow culture, because it's more taking from the era of the communism where they call it yellow peril. So I think that's how they got the thing. And also, at this time, during this era, the early 70s, this is the time when student power started, where our current Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, was a part of the leaders of that movement going against the government, especially because there were some sort of famine, people not have enough to eat up north, in the northern side of the peninsula. So the students would go down the bus and protest and everything, and there was a major crackdown. So around that time, they are not just cracking down on the young people playing rock music, but also on political conscious students around that time. Okay, so now let's go to the 80s. So the 80s is where I think it's a bit more bright and colorful and things. That's because of the mud rock. We call it mud rock. Mud means a guy. We call it the how to say it? It's the name that you put on a guy, and rock is rock. So mud rock. So it become mud rock. Become one of the first, in a way, subculture that was really, really big. And I think it's still going on now in some ways, even though the population is still the old people from those days. Very rarely you see young people getting into this. So this is again taking the more influences from the UK and the US and all that, Deep Purple, all those bands, and by the early 80s, you start seeing like more kind of like glam, the new glam, because previously in the 70s they had already glam, but this more kind of glam rock from sort of American style kind of glam rock of the early 80s. So they wear all the spandex and all these things, you know. And one of the best band for me anyway is this band. Yeah, they're the roughest one compared to the rest.
Dudana kau yang punya angkara, mengali setiap pandangan manusia, yang bengar kau palsukan, tugasmu seumpama syaitan.
So this one started by early 80s, but then it got really big by a compilation that was put out by a label called Warnada. It's called Battle of the Bands. And Battle of the Bands kind of like started this whole fever of Malay rock bands. And we call it Malay rock because they sing in Malay most of the time. And then they were traveling, touring everywhere in the country. But of course, they had a lot of pushback from the government. Again, that moral panic about them being, bad boys, you know. And there's also some girls in the band also anyway. But there's a huge pushback. And also musically, it's a bit too rough for them. So most of this band were, again, like I said before, the record companies who signed them up. Once they got signed up, then they were, in the contract at least, it would say like you can't really sing your own song, maybe only one or two in an album, so you get somebody else to write your song because the company just wanted to sell. So they use the bands to make a lot more money, where the band just go along with it because they're a contractor and they got a bit of money. So yeah, the biggest band will be Search. It's really big because they also got big in Indonesia. And then there's Wings, which comes much later. There's a lot of, but even now they're still going some ways, you know. By the time of the 90s, it became really what we call it as, at this time we call it rock kangkang because when they stand like with the feet apart like this. So that's rock kangkang. And then by the 90s, it's called rock lele, meaning that their song is so sad and slow and everything. So anyway, so it's also, like I said, the government also kind of cracked down on them. So like this one said, on the top left, that's at that time, Najib, I know the famous Najib, who ran away with so much money. He was the deputy prime minister of that era, and then he was telling that there's Satan in the rock music. And then down below the color picture is where there was some sort of live ceremony on TV where the Minister of Communication or Minister of Culture, Muhammad Rahmat, his name was, he did this thing where he cut off the hair of the singers of two bands, Search and Wing, because they were being banned at that time. It's very hard for them to play shows, and so the songs not being played on the radio, things like that. So I think the bands need to live somehow, so they went along with it. Even though now they're saying that's the saddest days of their life, and then on the right side, those are scenes from that festival at the Camp Semangat, the Woodstock Festival 1972, which kind of like start a lot of the problem in terms of young people being creative and doing things that's not normal to the kind of society. And also, this is the 80s. But I forgot to tell you before that in 1979, the 80s has been kind of governed by this new feel about, new search for identity by the Malays. You have to remember all the Malays in Malaysia, they are Muslim. So in 1979, there was the Iranian revolution where Reza Pahlavi, the king at that time, was kicked out, and then the very the harder element of Islam start coming in and everything, and that influenced a lot of people in Malaysia. And then you can see there's a kind of sudden turn from a more kind of laid back, almost liberal society. It become really hard, and they're going for the more parliamentarist ideas. And these are the point where in the 60s you can still play music in Kelantan and Terengganu, the northeast, but by that time you can't do anything anymore, and that's where I come from. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is when punk started to come. Okay, this one is more about the background of punk back then in New York and also in England. So what I'm listing there is all the bands from the earliest one, which is called more like a proto-punk, the early bands that later on influenced a lot of the punk bands of the late 70s. So you got Velvet Underground, you got New York Dolls, MC5, the Stooges, and those guys. And by the time of 1974, you got this new generation, like the Ramones, television is... the thing about that time, the musically is very diverse, and they're coming from everywhere. The more arty side of things, the more bohemian kind of side of things, the more streetwise kind of thing. So, which is, for me, I really love at this era because there is differences, in a lot of their output and their influences and things like that. And by 1975, 76, bands in England started. Before that, it was more like in the US. Like in Detroit and Cleveland and also in New York. But by about 75, 76, 77, that's happening in the UK, in London, basically. Spearheaded by Sex Pistols, of course. And of course, from then on, there's The Clash and all that. And then it becomes such a force that I think for the very first time, it kind of like push away everything else. It becomes so big. And also, at that time in the UK, they have all these music papers, weekly music papers, and radio DJs that are sympathetic to this new sound because they got tired of progressive rock and all this more kind of like arty kind of thing. So everything, like what the Ramones did was to minimize everything. They distract these complications, minimize it to 3-4 chords, and then the best thing about it democratized the way to play rock, Before that, you have to really learn how to, all the scales and things like this. I think nowadays, people are wanting to, do scales again. It's always a cycle anyway. So then after that, there's got post-punk, which is another part which I really love because they take the raw ideas of punk and just move it to somewhere else using a lot of elements from art, from films, from books, and then they make it minimal, they make it kind of like spacious, using reggae, as using like beats of reggae, using a lot of the crowd rock kind of elements, and even they went on to like synthesizer pop and things like that, which is really brilliant. For me, at this time, because I got into punk in 1978, right? So this is the time for me that really, really just kind of like every new band you listen to is amazing. Because it's so different from what happened before you. Because I grew up with my brother, elder brother was like 4 years older than me. And he and his friends were at one point, we were just listening to nothing but Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, all these hard rock bands, early heavy metal bands from the UK. And when I found this, I was on my own, nobody else. My brother told me about these guys. But anyway, it's like, wow. So it became like, this is the music of my generation, because those guys who were doing the music in England at that time was about 3 or 4 years older than me. So then New Wave new wave is basically punk, but it's so accessible. So it's punk that has been erased. The sharp beats, the more controversial beats, been erased, and then presented to the public in a very accessible way. That's new wave. Basically, that was the actual term, because the music industry at that time doesn't want to use the word punk because it have all the negative connotation to it, right? So that's new wave, and of course, all this for me, after 1978, everything else, even if you play punk, that was post-punk already, because the actual punk that happened was around 75, 76, 77. Yeah, okay? So I'm just showing you this to show how we got it, because back then, what happened when Sex Pistols appear on TV and start cursing, saying the F word on TV live, and then the way the fans were dressing, they got safety pin over their cheek, and the way they dress, and then some of them go around with swastika around, and all these things. They're trying to shock the people, or the normal people. So that's the point where the media just latched onto it as a sensationalist kind of stories and news, and that's how it appeared on a lot of media over Malaysia also, like newspapers and things. You can always see these pictures of them with mohawk and things like this. And one of the main one was Time Magazine. I don't know if you guys know Time Magazine. Time Magazine was everywhere back then. It's a political news magazine and also cultural that you pay subscription for. You got it every week, I think, yeah. So, and also Newsweek, that's another one. And basically, it's an American magazine that, in a way, almost like propaganda for the USA kind of reasoning. So one of the first is that picture that I got, a Time Magazine there. And there's more here. This is the first article by Time Magazine. And I got this because when I found out about punk, I started to look for where I can find this, images and whatever it is that I can find. It's very hard. I have to say, I live in Dungun. It's a very small town on the east coast of the peninsula of Malaysia, and also in Terengganu, which is also one of the most conservative areas ever. I'm lucky because Dungun used to be one of the main mining town inside, where a lot of the British were living there for a while. So Dungun is a bit weird in that sense, a bit more, I can't say liberal, but there's a lot more artistic kind of people there. And you can get books and you can get magazine because of the British were living there. So, okay. I will have to say this article is really a major influence on me because he has that shock value, which is beside the point. I mean, when you're young, it's like, wow. But it's also talk about poetry, like the poetry that done by the guys from television, the band in New York, and also Patti Smith and things like this, that precursor to the actual punk that come out, that lent it a lot more intellect. There's a lot more I don't want to go arty, but there's a lot more substance to just being loud and angry. So that's how I kind of got really happy with it. This is mainly all the. I talk about how controversial punk was back then. This is where this is all from English newspapers and how it blow out everything beyond what it's all about, And that's how punk becomes such a buzzword all around the world, and that's how small things start to happen all around the world. Okay. This one, okay, let's go. This is my personal journey in getting into the punk rock. Okay, I have a brother, like I said before. His name is Yi, and he studied in an elite school because he was a very smart guy, but he was financed by the government. We were very poor, but the government would look for kind of like smart kids to send to really good schools. And he was there. When he was there, he actually fell into a lot of the music fans who were already listening to really, for me, very substantial rock bands from Roxy Music to Genesis and all these people who are a lot more than just rock music. And Patti Smith, like I said before, and all that. And me, I was also studying in a boarding school, but it's not far from my hometown. And one night, because I'm very close to my brother Yi, his bus from his school in the West Coast would arrive at about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And me and my sister, because there's only 3 of us, we would wait for him in front of the house. And then when the bus arrived, we just go and grab him and then get his stuff and bring it inside the house. And in that process, his notebook fell on the floor inside the house. And I look at it. He opened up to that page, this image of that guy. That's Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, taken from 1976. And if you come from when you're hanging out with all these older guys who are into Deep Purple, wearing denim, long hair, and then you see this, you say, what's this? It's like totally alien at that time. I guess now it's nothing, but for me, at 14 years old, and there was nothing like this happening in Malaysia or anywhere, I mean, apart from England, I guess. That really shocked me. And I asked my brother, what's this? And then he told me the story about this band who just actually played their last show in San Francisco and split up somewhere, I think it was February 1978. And from this picture actually totally changed my life. And that's my journey began. And I was alone. There's nobody who's into this. So what I would do, I would go around looking for more news or more pictures about this. I haven't listened to the song yet. It's just this guy. And what's written on his navy jacket is actually God Save the Queen, which is one of their songs later on. That defiant, the face and all this thing just really got me. Anyway, so I start going around. In my pocket, I would carry razor blade so that when I go to shops, bookstores, or libraries, I would cut down anything to do with punk rock. Yeah, but when I'm on my holidays, there was a shop, a Chinese shop, selling the stuff you need for school, but they also imported. I mean, a lot of imported magazine from England. Mainly at that time, it was the not music magazine yet, but the teenage magazine from the UK, like Jackie magazine, which is all about, it's for girls of about 16 years old, 17 years old. But they would have great punk rock posters inside there. So I always go and try to get it. And also there's Look In, there's Oh Boy and all this thing, which is mainly geared for young people, teenagers in the UK, but always feature a lot of the great band that was just coming out in the UK. Right, so that's I'm gonna go for here. This is me, if you see in the middle there. That's me at school in 1980. No, one with the jacket. It's a bit blurry, yeah. The one in the black jacket, that's me. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, the guy smoking is my friend. He also changed his name. My real name is not Joki, okay? So I went to school. I went to this boarding school I told you before, and I went to the first week. I think I went out to see, because I love movies. So I went to see a movie called Joe Kidd, which is Clint Eastwood's worst movie, I think. But when I came back, I wrote it on a notebook in my class, and then at that time, as per usual, when you join a school, people are looking for a nickname for you, and they look at it and they start calling me Joe Kidd. So this guy beside me, his name is Juan Buzzley Bin something. He changed also his name to Von Billy. So everyone got all this like really kind of like almost westernized kind of name going. So anyway, as you can see also at that time, a lot of the school, you have a lot of people wearing tudung. The women are mostly wearing the tudung already. This is 1980, you know. So you can see there's a change, because prior to that, you don't really see young women or women wearing the tudung, the shawl. I mean, what do you call it? I can't remember the name of it, but it's starting already. Okay, on the other side of those are the magazines on top. Those are New Music Express. Those are weekly newspapers, weekly music papers from England, which is like, if you are into music, it's like you must read it. Because it's not just about the coverage. The writing also taught you a lot about how to write and also how to kind of dig deeper than the surface. I mean, a lot of magazines nowadays, or even around that time also, always write about bands, about music in a very surface manner. These guys, the writers would spend like 3 days with a band on a tour to come back and write, meaning that they really go. So I collected this. It comes from London to UK and to KL very late. It took about 3 weeks or 1 month because it's sent in by ship. And I would send money in an envelope to a shop in Kuala Lumpur, which is far away from where I was staying. I have to cover the money with carbon paper. I don't know if you know guys carbon paper. Carbon paper was used with typewriter when you want to copy. Let's say you're writing one piece, but you need another copy. You can't photostat, ma'am, at that time, and you can print. So you put carbon paper in the between. So when you type the front also at the back, right? So this carbon paper. I can't believe I have to tell you guys this, but anyway, carbon paper. If you put money inside it in that envelope to send to somebody, X-ray machine cannot read it. X-ray, I mean, it blocks X-ray. So your money will be safe. So what I did was I sent money to an Indian Muslim bookstore in Kuala Lumpur, and that guy would send me every week when he arrived, he would send it to me, New Music Express, and I would sit down and read religiously and even kind of like mark which band is great and all that. Yeah, so those are also some of the magazines you can get at that time. And again, I have to tell you, because Malaysia was under the British, so the remnants of the media, especially newspapers and things, still arriving in Malaysia for a long time. And also, if you look at the black and white picture, that's not that handsome man, but still, one of the most important people everywhere. I just talked to, I don't know, you guys know Lenny Kwok from Hong Kong. I mean, he's living there now. He was art activist. He got theater. He was doing a lot of theater and everything. Also political activist in that sense. But I interviewed him, and he said, Joe, I also listen to John Peel. And, I mean, because in Hong Kong, which was under the British, so you can get any coverage of the media, radio, anything directly. The same in Singapore. A lot of my friends in Singapore, they also grew up listening to John Peel. And that's John Peel. And John Peel is so amazing. Like, if you know Pink Floyd, right? Who introduced Pink Floyd to the public in the 60s? John Peel. So he's the one who kind of like, he's this weird guy who loved to kind of highlight bands that different from the rest, that different from around them, different from the trend. So he's always on this edge of discovery. He's like the hippest man in that sense. And for us living in Malaysia at that time in the late 70s, early 80s, you listen to him through BBC World Service, because the English would have this, broadcasting company who just put it everywhere, but through shortwave radio. Again, I need to explain to you shortwave radio, because nowadays you have FM stereo, right? And then right before that you got middle wave, which is like much better sounding, much stable signal when it been broadcasted. Before that was shortwave. And shortwave is like, when you listen to shortwave, the song goes, yeah, nicely, and you know what I mean? So all the static and everything. But me and my friend, every Wednesday at 5:30, we would rather risk being arrested by our teachers, because you're supposed to go to the sports. You had to play soccer or you play whatever. You're not supposed to be in a hostel. But we would, hide under our bed to listen to John Peel on shortwave. And it goes on for years and years. And what I do personally, I would record the show, and then the next few days I would sit down, listen to it, and I still have all these books, notebooks, where I would review all the bands that John Peel played. And the music that he plays, of course, there's punk rock. He's one of the earliest champion of punk rock. But also there's African pop, electronica, really obscure progressive rock, whatever. I mean, he's just amazing. In the late 80s, he started to play more kind of from the dancey, raver kind of thing, electronica, all that, So he is, for us, for many of us, he's like the other father, So, yeah. And like I said, people at my age who are really obsessive about music, they would know about him. And if you go back home, check out John Peel, then you know. All right, so next one. This is about why you're coming here. I'm sorry, it took so long to come to this bit. But yeah, so the Malaysian Underground, the word underground even was used in the British music scene back then to denote people like Jimi Hendrix even, because the underground in the sense that it has this not so commercial value, and also the people who listen to it, all those misfits and all this things like that. And when I talked to one of the oldest guy who was writing about music in Singapore, he told me the same thing. Whenever you go to a record store in the 60s, 70s, you ask, if you're into that, you ask, do you have any underground records? So then they will bring Cream, like the old Eric Clapton band and all these bands. And so let's see what I wrote here. Okay, into the Malaysian underground of what I was involved in. Okay, I wrote there that because Ling put the title as a punk thing, because I think it's of course it's punk, but in the sense we like to make it more inclusive. So we always call the underground scene in Malaysia as the underground scene. It's not a punk scene or a metal scene, because inside that umbrella of the underground, there's so many different styles of music. Of course, the larger one is metal, thrash metal, death metal, black metal, and then hardcore punk, oi, whatever. I mean, so it's pretty much a term that inclusive of everyone, because that's what we did. Because, like I said, it's a community. Because what happened was there was Central Market in central Kuala Lumpur, the city of Kuala Lumpur. There's an old market that goes back 100 years or more. A wet market that sells all the fish and everything from 100 years ago. And it became kind of a cultural hub, somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s. And then become more kind of, clean. Because it become more like a restaurant inside there and things like this. So all the guys who run away from their respective place, I would call ourselves people who at that time cannot fit in with the normal society. I'm not necessarily misfit in the sense of being criminal or whatever, but we just cannot fit into the society in that sense that we are not normal. We are asking too much questions, things like that. So which is why I kind of decided to leave Terengganu to go to KL. Okay, so it started way back. There was a band called Metal Ghost in 1982. And this is strange, guys, because Metal Ghost was a band that was influenced by one of the more kind of controversial bands called Venom. Metal, satanic metal in that sense. But this band is coming from Perlis, which is up north, which is one of the most conservative places in Malaysia. Later on in 1985, they changed the name to Blackfire. And that band is like the grandfather of extreme metal in Malaysia. Yeah, good friend of mine. Even the singer played bass in my punk band sometime. Okay, so then in terms of the projection, I tell you, when I was at school, I was telling you about the school and everything, there was not many people. By about 1980, 81, there were punks in the school. And then, further on, there were punks in every school. In every school in Kuala Terengganu, at least there'd be 2 punk rockers. And then we would be hanging out at the bus station, the main bus station of Kuala Terengganu, the biggest city in Terengganu, where we would trade cassette. I have this, you have this. Come on, let's do this. Like fanzines and pictures, whatever. And at that time, I had my mohawk for about 3 days because then my mom cried, so I have to cut it off. So that's where it started. Because everywhere else in Malaysia at that time, I didn't know that I didn't hear anything that got kind of punk thing happen. In Terengganu, there's a lot. To the point that there were 2 groups. There's a group that come from Mengabang Teliput, which is a fishing village about 20 miles north of Kuala Terengganu, the main city. And then the guys from Tanjung Boys, the Tanjung is right in the city. Whenever these 2 kind of like crews would meet, there'll be a fight. But that's more like, oh, you're not punk, you're just a poser. You're not punk, that sort of stuff. But I would like to, describe to you. Okay, you imagine a fishing village, right? Atap roof. Sometimes it's rotten kind of walls, And then because many times I go there to hang out with my friends. And you walk through the houses, and then you hear Sex Pistols on that house. And then you hear the Clash there, the Stranglers there, like, this is like fishing village Terengganu, So it's like really, really weird if you really think about it. And also, at that time, we thought that we need to spread this thing more. So we started some sort of a library at one of our friends' house in Mengabang Teliput, the Kampung Mengabang Teliput. The library is actually a cupboard. And inside the cupboard, we put in fanzine, cassettes, some records, books. So then any punks that come through can borrow it and bring it back, copy it and bring it back. So we call it the Lojan. The Lojan went on for years. So that's the time when I was in Terengganu. But at that time, it's very hard. There is no shows, there's no gig. So what you do as a kind of like early 20s, late teenager kind of guy, you got really, really bored, So what you do is you get on the small bike, we call it the Kapchai, the 70cc bike, and then many of us would just go together, find a coffee place right beside the road we can hang out, and then come back. And those are the activities that we did before we start getting into ganja and all that, because it's so boring, there's nothing to do. Okay? So yeah, also at that time, the things, music are changing, I'll get into hardcore punk in the earlier 80s. Before that, we're listening to like Discharge, and all that. Then by the early 80s, you got this more American style kind of hardcore punk and all that. And then also, so me and my friends start always moving with the next thing that's coming at that time. Like we would listen to Bad Brains when Bad Brain just came out with that cassette on Raw Record, the first album, which we ordered by pulling our money, sending it off to New York and got it sent. Things like this, we did that. And to be a punk at that time, you don't have money, of course, you cannot buy Doc Marts. So what you do is you go and ask for maybe from somebody who knows who's an army, who's a part of the army, a soldier. You say, can I have your boots? Usually the boots are like green canvas. So you bring that to the batik shop. You know, batik is where they make the dye for the women's clothing and things like this. And you ask her, black, please. So yeah, then dye it, and then we pay her like 50 cents or 1 ringgit, and then you got dot mat, but you know. And then the buttons, we make it ourselves. You know, you cut. You know, you got buttons from political parties doing the speeches. We just go there. Can I have the button, please? And then we bring back the buttons, and then we paste the images from the magazine that we see or whatever. And then to make it last, you cover it sellotape, like, you know, just. And then after a while, we got to know about to make it better by using the cuticle thing. The women would use it for the nails, so the nail polish. So it's much better. But yeah, we did all this thing because we were poor. We don't have that much money, and we're not really living in a city or anything like that, you know. Anyway, so the first rumbling of punk bands happening was in Terengganu also. There was a bunch of guys, but these two brothers, one of them was studying at one of the elite schools down there, because also like me, we were subsidized by the government. And when he finished his studies, he went to the school hall and ran away with the guitar the guitar, the bass, and the amp somehow. And he brought it back to Terengganu, and then he wanted to start a band. And he told me how he, drums would need the pedal. So he used a bicycle pedal to make the pedal for the drum set. But anyway, these guys, they formed the first band called Malaria. And they put out one of the first demo tape ever. At that time, there was no punk band, actually. During that time, a lot of the bands were mud rock, you know, playing rock music. Or the elder one would be playing blues and all these things, but there's no punk bands. One of the main causes is because to form a band would cost a lot of money. And when you are like that young, you still have no job and everything, you can't, you know. To buy a drum set is already like, oh my God, no, I can't. But by about 1986, 87, almost all of the biggest cities in Malaysia would have what they call the jamming studio. A jamming studio, I don't know, you guys would know, I guess. A jamming studio is where you go in and everything is there. The drum set, the guitar, the amps, and everything. So by about the mid-80s, a lot of kids start forming bands, you know. After school, they go to that place, pay like 10 ringgit or 8 ringgit in Malaysia, and then you have 1 hour of equipment which you can use. So that's the boom that started from around there. Okay, so in 1980, okay, at that time also I was writing to a lot of people overseas. By the early about 1983, 84, we got to know about that punk was not just happening in the UK or in the US or the Northern Europe. There were punks in Hungary, there were punks in Italy, in Japan, in Peru, even in Cuba. So all these were written down, I mean, the addresses were written down by scene report. They call it the scene report is when you go somewhere and you write an article saying, okay, this band is here, they're playing this, they're playing that, this is the address. So that's a scene report. And you got a list of all these bands or fanzines or whatever. And we read Maximum Rock and Roll, which is from San Francisco, which was sent to us by our friend who was studying in Australia and some of the friends that we're writing in the UK or even in Italy. So from those letters, we write to all these bands and things like that, you know. And I got so many pen pal. I don't know if you guys use that concept, pen pal. It's friends with pen friends. And this is way before email and all that. So I call it punk pals. Anyway, so I got so many of them in England, Poland, and all these things. And what we do those days was like to ask them, can you send me the LP, man? Because we don't have the money even, you know. But they are very kind enough to send fanzine, everything. I got like Alternative Tentacles recordings and everything, all this like really amazing stuff. And I kept complaining about the scene in Malaysia because, man, there's nothing happening at all. We would go to see a rock band playing to laugh at them because they're so silly, because they got all the spandex on and makeup and everything. And then one guy from England, I think, who said, F you, Joe. The sin is what you do. You have why don't you do something about it? You just complain and complain. And I was like, really, I felt like I was being slapped in the face. And I thought, okay. I started to do a fanzine. Okay, before that, there was a guy, a friend of mine. His name was Mamat. He put out like a fanzine, but more kind of newsletter. And it's called Huru Hara, which is chaos in Malay. And he just like kind of show it to his friends, but never really kind of like protested it and, spread it. I did the first one, and it's called Eddie's Fanzine. Yeah, that's the one. That's the first issue. So Eddie's Fanzine was the first fanzine that kind of go everywhere. And inside there, I think there's a copies that they can kind of go through. This is right after I left college, because in college, I was a stoner. So much that I didn't do anything. Besides, riding bikes, going for races sometime. But once I stopped taking ganja, I suddenly become like really industrious. And this is the first thing that I made. And this is, again, life-changing, because I have so many friends who I've been in contact with in Europe and in even South America. So I interviewed them. So I just sent email. Like normal fans, you interview these people. And then from there, the network get bigger and bigger and bigger. And by about, I think, when malaria started and I started this thing, I heard, I was still in Terengganu, still living in Terengganu at that time. I heard there's a rumbling of a scene with bands, because we had a scene but no bands, which is like really silly. Because we can't afford it. But anyway, there was a friend. This guy, his name Luke Haas. I met him here at Zeeman area 3 days ago. He came to visit Lenin and these guys. He was one of the most important figure in terms of discovering for the best word, I think it's really bad word, but exotica punk, punk that is not from the usual places. He started out going to Hungary, which is all the communist state, Poland, Austria, to find punk rock. Because at that time, the focus in terms of the punk world was always like US, UK, and then the northern European area, and some bits in Japan. But never inside this like really oppressive countries. Because his name is Luc Haas. He's from Strasbourg in France. And he always think that to be a punk in kind of like money-rich countries is so easy. Whereas if you are from all these places, there's so much thing that go against you. Even the punks in East Berlin, East Germany at that time, they were under the watch of the special police and all this thing, and that thing happened in Poland and all that. But his interest is not just in Europe, so he would go even to Lebanon, to everywhere. And then he came to Malaysia in 1987, because at that time we've been in touch, me and my friend been in touch with him, because he was writing all his scene report to the Maximum Rock and Roll, which is the main, we call it the Bible of punk for the global punk scene. It comes out every month in San Francisco. So anyway, we've been reading his articles and been writing, using his articles, writing to all these people overseas. He decided to come. When he was in Kuala Lumpur, I was in Terengganu. He called me up. He's coming in the next few days, but he said, I have to call you up now, because he was working by a jamming studio, like I told you before, rehearsal studio. And on the board of schedule, which next band going to come and practice, there were 3 bands written down. One of them called Punisher, second one is Nemesis, I think the third one is Rator, if I can't remember correctly. This is 1987, right? And then when he called me, asked me that, and I was immediately like, I know, because this is not a rock band, normal rock band. First of all, Punisher is from that comic. And then people of my age at that time were really into comic too. And then Nemesis is also a name from a character in comic from England. 2000 AD. I don't know whether you know it, 2000 AD comic. So I know immediately. At that time, we also been listening, because I was introduced to thrash metal in about 85, 86 via cassette with Slayer and the early Metallica and all that. So I know there's something happening. So me and my friends, sometimes when we have money, we go to Kuala Lumpur or Singapore or Penang, the bigger cities, where we can go to a record store and dub, they sell records, vinyl, but we don't have vinyl player. So we go there and choose a tape, a cassette, 45 minutes or 90 minutes, which is, those days they call it C30, C45, C90, C120. So all those are different length of the cassette. And you give it to the guy, you choose the record that you want, okay, please dub it for me. And the next 2 days you go back there, pay him, and come back with all these recordings, you know what I mean? That's how we get stuff back then. And also, to go beside the point, there was a huge bootleg or pirated cassette industry at that time. Because the international law was in terms of copyright, was only recognized by Malaysia in about 1987, 88, around that time. Prior to that, it's a free-for-all for anyone to just copy and sell, did the cover. So anyway, I heard about this Punisher and this other band. It was Nemesis. And I asked my friend who's going down to Kuala Lumpur to do this dubbing, can you go please look for them and get their address? And he came back with the address of Punisher. So the second issue of my fanzine featured an interview with Punisher as the first local band that I interviewed. And Punisher at that time was a band who was trying to be Metallica. The early scene at that time, the bands were playing covers mainly. Like Nemesis was trying to be either Slayer, so mostly Slayer or Sodom from Germany and all that. So whereas Punisher was trying to be Bay Area thrash metal, like Forbidden and all this. But it's still for me, because for us punks, thrash metal or speed metal, before thrash metal was called a thrash metal, it was called a speed metal, because it was way faster. And we know this comes from punk rock, comes from hardcore punk. So it's a marriage between hardcore punk and metal that birthed this new thing called thrash metal, and then go on with death metal and all that. So once I got the answers, I know already I need to go to Kuala Lumpur, because there's nothing else happening in my town. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing you do when you go to KL, you hang out at Central Market. Central Market is, for years, decades after that, is where the place where the more artistic kind of youth would hang out. And this is because there's an Indian Muslim restaurant inside there, which will allow you to just order one tea, or we call it teh tarik tea, and then we just sit there from about, how many hours you want. So when you don't have money, you just order one tea, and then you sit there until like it closes down at about 10 p.m. at night. And everybody's there. Everybody's involved in the arts, people who are doing busking, poetry, the punks, the metalheads, everybody hang out there. And from there is where you started to find which wedding we're going to play tonight, which, starting to do organizing gigs and things like this. And that is the gist of where it started to happen in terms of the Malaysian underground scene. And I tell you this thing, the people, the kids who were a part of that scene, that the earliest bands and the people who hang out with us at that time, they were not from Kuala Lumpur. All of them was not from Kuala Lumpur. So I like to think that this where people like me, who's misfit of society in that sense, we cannot fit, go down to find ourselves in that sense. Because if you live in your place, then you got religious fervor that trying to change you to something that you're not. Maybe you are, but you don't know yet. And expectation from the parents and all these things. Everybody just ran away. So everybody hang out at Central Market. So that's the where everything happened. Okay. So the scene basically started somewhere around 87, 88. And these are the bands that, like Nemesis, Punisher, and there's more after that. And the venue was where these bands were playing was a venue called Galactica. Kind of a roller skating kind of pub, And then that place closed down after kids were moshing, and then one wall fell down. And then the owner said, "That's it, no more, you have to find another place." So then it goes on, from 1989 to 1990, that's a different thing. And I have to tell you about 121C. There's a house in an area called Brickfield called 121C. I wish I have the picture. It's on the third floor of his apartment building, very, very old building. They got 4 rooms inside there. And I was one of the guys, was the early tenants in that house, because we actually, 4 of us went looking for this place and found it. But around 1990, up to even now, actually, it's still there, and still one of the original tenants still there. 121C is legendary because whenever you are in Kuala Lumpur to see gigs, right? And of course, you have no place to stay. You don't have money. So everybody stays at 121C. So it's like, you don't need to worry when you come from Penang up north or Johor from south to see this show, because there was no shows at that time everywhere else, only in Kuala Lumpur. So you go there, you know where you're going to stay. So there is this sense of community there that's awesome. And the bands would stay there. There's several bands stay there from that part onwards, from Silkhanas to Suffocation. All these bands that become big later on, and us, Kabrita Dang, my band. So that is still there. One of the guys, Naim, one of the first guys who started to do T-shirt for local bands, is still there. He's the T-shirt guru. Let's go through this. So yeah, it goes on. This new band coming in. I don't know whether you know a band called Silent Death, which is really legendary. And they are one of the first guys from Kuala Lumpur itself who started to hang out in Central Market with us. And yeah, shows start to happen in a more constant manner. By about 89, there's one period there's no show, so I have to, and I thought about, because the problem with a small scene like that, a small musical scene like that, when the bands are not playing, the bands usually split up, or they just kind of like gave up and things like this. So there was about 3-4 months there's no shows, and I got really worried. So I went to approach Funfair. You know Funfairs? You got all the thing going, and the Funfairs would go to a place and stay for about a month. And this Funfair usually would have a stage. So I went to see them, one of them the first time. I said, "You have a stage, would you like to have a band?" And I said, "Yeah, would you pay?" They said, "Yes, 350. I said, "Okay, good." So then I got 2 bands, and I went and borrowed some money from a friend because we still need to get some equipment. And then I started, this is my first organizing a show. Before that I was just being this guy who do the flyers for this band and things like this. And from then on, we have all these shows at Funfairs everywhere. And Funfair shows is fun because it's open air most of the time. And one of the biggest one that we did with this band called Mutilation and the Pilgrims was like full of mud because it was raining. So, but everybody was just, don't care anyway. So we had so much fun with that. Okay, so that first generation, no. In 1990, 91, there was a bar with a stage which is called Metallica Lounge. Called me up and said, "Joe, would you like to do shows here?" And I said, "Yes, of course." So I started doing shows there. And at this point, punk bands like the Pilgrims, at that time they called Hijrah and Malaria, they were still in the East Coast. They haven't gone down to Kuala Lumpur yet. So I was desperate to see a punk band that play, because I'm more into that, with all these metal bands who are playing, all these covers. So the first punk band in Singapore is called Opposition Party. So I call up Francis. We've been in touch. Being punks, we always been in touch with each other. So I brought them to come to KL and play a show at Metallica Lounge. I think it was late '89 or early 1990. And one of the best things that happened that night was, beside me singing one song with them, which was my first time ever on stage, but the metalheads there, I think they just heard a cover of the Sex Pistols song Anarchy in UK by Megadeth. That's not the metal band. And they start asking this punk band to play Anarchy in the UK. And Francis and opposition party, they are not. Francis went up to the mic. Thank you guys for asking this song, but we don't play covers. We just play our own song. And that is a big thing because all the bands at that time were playing covers. Either you want to be Teutonic German thrash metal or you want to be crossover, DRI kind of stuff. Everybody was doing covers. So when Francis said that, everybody was taken aback. Because that's the time, I think, that the band started to, okay, we have to go and write our own stuff now. Yeah. Anyway, Metallica Lounge goes, it would start at 10 p.m. at night. Of course, you see, on the flyer it said 10 p.m. Of course, you would start about 12. And it would end around 4 or 5 in the morning. So for us, it was amazing because, people got drunk and all this thing. And there's so many people that's to the point that the next few shows, the owner of the pub had to put a TV outside of the venue so that people who cannot go in can still hear from the inside, but then we can watch what's happening on stage. So that was another kind of turning point in the scene in Kuala Lumpur. But from then on, it became bigger and bigger and bigger. Because as you know, I think Sonic Youth put out, a DVD called The Year Punk Broke, 1991, I think. But it didn't break to the mainstream just as yet, just a bit, until Nirvana come through. Nirvana come through in 92. Because I was on a bus going to at that time I was running a record label, on a bus. And because I heard Nirvana already through Sub Pop compilation and things. And I heard their song. And I said, this is Nirvana. How come it's on the radio? Which is like weird, totally weird, So, but then we realized that it became big. And then that drove the scene in some ways because suddenly a lot of young people come to the shows. Like you got 2,000 people at shows, from about 92 up to about 96, around that time this became so big. All form of sub-genres in the local underground scene started, from crossover. I don't know whether you guys know all these guys. Some of you are not into the scene would know. Right. Crossover is like hardcore punk meeting metal, but more chuggy and fast. And then you got the indie pop kids coming along also, because they start hanging out with us also. And I've always been into indie pop in that sense, because I think indie pop is another version of punk, but those guys who just don't want to go angry all the time, and they just want to sing about themselves, like the Smith. It's a reaction to that reaction, you see. But anyway, so they got kids who are doing industrial music, with like really primitive for tracks that they have at that time. So the scene in Kuala Lumpur also open up to like Penang, Johor, Ipoh, like everywhere, like bands in Terengganu from where I come from. I think from about 92 up to about 96, that was the golden year because everybody, there's so much shows, so many bands. And one thing I have to tell you, nowadays if you listen to bands, you can't really hear their own sound most of the time. It's like, this could be a band from Norway. This could be a band from, because they kind of like lost that sort of uniqueness, And a lot of bands now, they also want to be another band, not being themselves. But in the early 80s, and in the early 90s or late 80s, at least in Kuala Lumpur and around the region, because all the bands don't really know how to play, so they cannot play covers anyway. So they just do their own thing. So they have their own sound. And this is amazing, because if you listen, you know this is the Pilgrim, this is Investors Maggot, this is Moda, whatever. You know what I mean? Because they're so different from each other, but also different from the West in that sense, you see? And that's, even though how small it is, but it's still very different. But this is my main complaint. As you get older, you go, why do bands just want to be another band? Come on, be yourself. But that's happening everywhere now. And so by about, I started a sub-label from a big company, kind of big independent company who were doing pop stuff. Because in 1991, the first ever properly recorded release came out. It was a band called FTG. FTG is actually, they say it's Freedom That's Gone. FTG. Actually, it's F the government. But anyway, they were studio hands. They're young, but they're really good at the playing. So they're like backup bands for pop stars and things like this in the studio, right? Sessionists. So they formed this band called FTG, and they put out the first EP in 1991. And at that time, I was desperate to put out all my friends that doing all this, in the scene, because those bands has been getting offers from the normal record company, even the bigger independent company. They want to sign them. But of course, like I said before, when a band got signed, you lost a lot. Some band even lost their name. There was a band who the band is called, this is a rock band. They're called Expedition, which is an expedition. Expedition. They lost the name, so they have to to start using the name The Real SPDC. And this is how contractual work, because a lot of young people, when you say, okay, I'm going to sign this contract, I give you like 6,000 ringgit or something. Man, you're getting money. But you will be going through a lot of problems in the sense, first of all, your band cannot play the songs that you really want to play. And they will assign you established songwriters, established lyric writers, and essentially you just lost yourself, So these labels wanted to sign Punisher, Silent Dare, and all this. They want to sign it, but with that clause, So these guys always rejected it. A lot of punk bands rejected it. Metal band rejected. No, we want to play this. There's only one label that allows that, and it's called VSP, Valentine Sound Production, which has existed since late mid-80s, putting out a lot of kind of like really bad disco, Euro disco kind of stuff, cassettes. And they latch onto this thrash metal, have agreement with labels like Eurek in the UK, Peaceville in the UK, Nuclear Blast releasing all the cassettes in Malaysia, which I found out later become very influential for the Indonesian scene, because that's how a lot of the early metal heads or even punks in Jakarta or in Java started to listen. It's through VSP. And VSP, their first, I would say the first in a way underground release was a band called Chromox. And Chromox is a bunch of Malaysian students in Sydney, Australia. They were formed in 88, 89, and it's playing around there. They were the first thrash metal band from this area called Wollongong in Sydney. And VSP put out that demo. So now we got 2 releases, one after another, which really frustrates me because I want to have this going. So I went to see a record company. I said, guys, would you finance me as a sub-label, and then I get all this band recorded under this label of mine, but you finance the thing. Because they got a studio, they got even the cassette making plant. It's one building, 3 stories, Downstairs is a top-class studio. Upstairs is the office. On the top floor is a factory to make cassette or to duplicate cassette. So, and they said yes. So in 1992, I started a label called Sonic Asylum Records, and I signed up my friends. And the first ones of Moda, which is a doom metal band. I would say people now call it funeral doom because it's very slow and things like this. And after that, the Pilgrim, which is one of the first earliest punk band, they were formed in 1987. And after that, I think one of the best release ever, even though I put it out myself, is by a band called Infectious Maggots. And what they played was industrial grind with a lot of sampling and things like that. Really, at that time, if you guys ever heard of Fear Factory, they came out around the same time as Fear Factory, and they're really amazing. Because these guys, hanging out Central Market, they also listen to pop, they listen to jazz, they listen to Sheila Majid, if you know Sheila Majid. Yeah, so the way they do things is like really different. So I put out the three things, but the next release was a compilation where I decided to document or record my friends band who don't play metal. Because at that time there's a lot of metal bands, and the shows will have metal with non-metal bands playing together because we all pretty united at the time because the scene is still very small. But then I thought that we should have a documentation of what happened in 1992 with all these new bands that are forming around the people who are hanging out Central Market. And I call it a circle of friends. A circle of friends would have, I call in about 16 different acts. All these guys that I know that are doing something, all of them different. They are like acoustic singer-songwriter. There's one guy twiddling with some early Amiga computer thing, and bands. And that become, I would say, one of the first recording that pushes the more indie pop, alternative music. Even there's one band who was playing grunge, it was very early. So all the bands kind of represented the other sound apart from metal in the underground scene in Malaysia. And that was released in 93. And then it goes on. I mean, I don't know why, just go on and become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you got like even companies like Pony Canyon, which is from Japan, coming down to kind of like, start their own business there in Kuala Lumpur. And even Form Record, which is from Taiwan. And also, Rock Records. Rock Records also went down there later. So, there by the time like Kurt Cobain died, which is like, it's a major thing among a lot of kids. The scene was really up at it, like almost the best time. We have two gigs really big called Blast Off. I don't know where I put it. No, not Blast Off. Did I put it here? Oh, here. Hello. Okay. So those are the gigs that are happening. That's my fanzine. That's some of the Vortex from the East is one of the first extreme metal magazine that came out about 89, 90. So the boom time. And one of the places that we play all the time was called Piccadilly, because Piccadilly is actually a big space with big stage and like a two-tier seating. And for years they have this matinee dance for college kids to go on Sunday or to dance and with their friends. And at that time, it's all ages. Everybody can just go because they are not selling the usual liquor that they have. It's open to everyone to go. And then a lot of college kids will go there. We went there one day and said, can we do gigs here? And they said, yes. And that began quite a legendary run where everyone who's now kind of big stars in the Malaysian pop kind of alternative kind of era, now big name like Butterfingers, OAG, Flop Poppy, now they're big names over there. They played there. So most of the bands started also played there. And of course, at that time, then we start seeing the scene getting really big. And you know, when the underground scene got really big, you start to break up. The first thing I saw was in the thrash metal scene. Thrash, death metal, black metal were together. I think earlier on, the black metal kids, because they are a lot more hardcore in that sense, they move out and they start their own scene. And then from there, you see the skinheads who were hanging out at that time started their own oi, that scene. And you got, suddenly the scene that used to be really, really solid start to fracture. And in terms of the lineage or the genres that you're playing. And then, of course, then it started to fracture some more in terms of the places where you're coming from. Yeah. Okay, let's go further. This one is, this is the third generation. So the first one is the metal, the late, the third generation is different. Because by this time, a lot of the bands, younger bands, of course, in terms of in terms of punk rock, they start reading a lot of the more political, anarchist leaning, anti-corporate writing in all these magazines. And so they start having a pushback against all these bands previously, including my band, who was signed up to a small independent label. My band was under VSP for our first album in 1983. So they have a new kind of like blood coming in, who just going to keep the music within them, their circle. And then the one release that signifies this and really very influential even to myself is this band called The Bollocks. The Bollocks, this cassette, it's called Revolution, was really a revolution. It was released in early 97 and sold at 3 ringgit, at 3 ringgit. Usually cassettes would go about 13 ringgit, right? So he's selling at 3. Basically not taking any money at all. I mean, just taking maybe 50 cents from the cost, So that is actually signify the beginning of a new, more DIY geared, more political ideas driven, more also in a more dogmatic scene within the main underground scene. And this is happening while bands like OAG got really big, like selling 100,000 copies of the album. Butterfingers, the biggest grunge band, they're like, at that early days, Butterfingers were more like a copy of Nirvana, but they're huge, they got really big. So, like I said, there's a pushback. And also, this is also the era where there's a lot more political activism in that sense, at least they're trying to. So there's the forming of collectives, which kind of driven by the ideas of anarchism. So collective that would do some benefits and stuff for poor people and things like this, And also the rise of really independent distributions of independent releases, There were some before that, And these guys, they don't go through the normal channel of the music industry, not at all. It's all just by mail. They don't even put it in the store, in the mom and pop store, in the normal store, no. So basically, it's more like you know them, you know what I mean? And they got the flyers on the fanzines, and also at that time, there's a lot of fanzines. Did I tell you about 94 where I started my blasting concert? You can read my column here, which actually detailing what happened every week over there in Malaysia, like new bands coming out, new shows. I would review them, anything like bands being signed up with major labels. No, so that's writing about that and things like this, So yeah, 97, 98, that's the beginning of a new kind of, for me, what I always been looking for. Because I never really liked the music industry. The music industry in Malaysia is so brutal. Like, I tell you this story, right? if you sign up to, let's say, a label, and then the cassette that you recorded, of course they finance it. First of all, when they finance it, you don't own the recording anymore. You might own the songs, but the recording, you don't own it anymore. So if they want to sell it, you can't do anything. Secondly, the cassette will be released, will be sold at 13.50, 14, even 12. And you know how much per cassette a band would get? 50 cents. 50 cents. So this has been going on even before the underground scene becoming big and all that. You know, it's like the music industry in Malaysia is the worst when it comes to the respecting the rights of the artists. And also, I also blame them when nowadays we don't really, I mean, even those days, you don't have really substantial singer-songwriter bands that are really awesome. You know, most of them, the bands will sign up for a trend. Let's say the trend is rock kangkang, rock rally, whatever. And once the trend died out, you got kicked out, that's it. So you were not, allowed to become yourself. When you're not allowed to become yourself and be creative on your own terms, that's it. You don't have growth in terms of your personal growth and everything. So it's very rare to see like somebody who's been around since the 70s still around now and doing very, very well. A lot of the bands from the 80s are now selling burgers or upon that, like, you know, like really struggling, you know, and they are now in their 50s, 60s, you know. And you can see this, you know, happening all the time. So like I said, coming back to the main point, I hated the music industry then. So when the DIY scene come in and presented with a lot of alternatives on how to do things without relying on this cutthroat business and not a part of the business, then it become something special for me. And of course, we start doing the same thing with me, my bands, and I start coming back doing little newsletters. I stopped doing my fanzine, but I started newsletters talking about how you can do things this way and why. And also discussing about how you might lose the reach to a lot of people, because when you put in the normal record store, people just go, hey, what's this? And you buy it and listen and buy it. But now it's just within the scene. So in a way, you are in a silo somehow, unless you try to climb out of it. In terms of the political sense, there's like benefits doing for a lot of the, underprivileged people in Kuala Lumpur, at least. You know, the homeless. There's also a community of transgenders and sex workers in Kuala Lumpur, in the Chowkit area. So we do benefit for them too back then. And then by the late, I think about 99, we started Food Not Bombs. I don't know, you guys know what is Food Not Bombs? It was started by a bunch of younger friends of mine who are more attuned with the anarcho ideas, you know. Food Not Bombs started, if I'm not mistaken, in San Francisco in the 70s, I think. So Food Not Bomb, the name itself is just a food, not bombs, you know. It is not just a charity kind of a grouping. It's also coming with a statement that we all, as people, you know, globally, we have enough. We have enough food. We have enough. Everything, actually. But why there are people like homeless, that's why people who are hungry. You know, Food Not Bomb is about that. So, and what they do is like, we come together on Saturday, we grab anything we can find, we go to the market and get free stuff from the people who sell stuff, vegetables, you know, things like, or mainly we go for veggie or vegan kind of food. And then the next day we cook it, you know, cook it together like a community cookout. And then we bring it over to, if in KL there's a place near a church there, we would set our table there, and the homeless would come. And this is happening every Sunday, and it's still happening now, since 1999. So that's a part of for me, one of the best non-musical kind of activity by the punks in Kuala Lumpur. And that also started in Penang, in Johor, even though it doesn't last very long, but there's attempts to do this, even in Terengganu, where I was from. And there were these guys who were doing all that. Yeah. You guys have to tell me if I'm like veering away in terms of time. I can talk forever now. Okay, the internet. Guys, the internet suddenly turned up around 97, 98, and probably if you're rich, probably earlier. But it started to be available to a lot of normal people around 97, 98. And there was a time that I stopped being a journalist. About a year or two before that, I borrowed some money, bought a Mac, a small, they call it the pizza box Macintosh. And I learned how to do Photoshop, Illustrator, and all these things. And then after about a year, I started to offer my business, which is doing websites and design and book layout, whatever. This means that I can wake up anytime I want, which is great. And that goes on for years. But anyway, the internet also bring in IRC. I don't know your ICRC, you remember this? Where you can have chat within you, which is here, and with somebody else. So no more writing letters, Now it's, the kind of primitive emails start going, primitive websites, all these early days of the internet, and also, in a way, social media mainly was chat groups, Yahoo group. You got Yahoo group. You can set up your own Yahoo group. We set up in '98 Malaysia Underground Yahoo group, where you share when there's the next gig, when's the next release, and that's like huge. We got a lot, hundreds and hundreds of people on it, and then also that's where we discuss the more sensitive areas of stuff that in Malaysia, being a Muslim country. We talk about transgender rights. We talk about all these things, and it was great because the punks were. A lot of kids at that time were pretty much. We all come from very conservative ideas and thinking, and we've been groomed to be very pious Muslims. And you are not allowed to ask questions. But you being a punk rocker, you have questions. And then you're gonna ask them. And the chat group was one of the best place where we start exchanging these ideas. It also at that time that we start kind of like morphing into some part where the art scene also start coming in. So the more radical art scenes are also part of us and things like this, and I also started my Dunk People kind of like website where I put in when the next gig and all this thing, blah, blah, blah. So, and of course, a few years later, we got MySpace. You guys remember MySpace? You guys remember MySpace? My God. I'm still that old. So MySpace is like pre-Facebook, okay, guys? So MySpace is where, if you're part of the scene, it's where you can put your music, pictures of your band, when is the next gig and everything, and then people from like some very, very far countries say, hey, say hi, I got my band too. So there's this connection that happened, which is now happening with, Facebook. But at that time, it was amazing. MySpace died. It was sold away. I heard it was Justin Timberlake who bought it and didn't do anything with it. And also there's Friendster. I don't know if you know, guys, Friendster is also another one. This is the place where all the younger people, get together. And especially important for the underground scene. Because this is where we can put our voice, what's happening and everything. And collaboration also. So yeah.
Sorry, I joke it because I think we can leave some time for our audience to ask questions. Let's
kind of like, okay. So I'm talking from about 1978 where I started. Where there's not many people into punk rock scene. By about the late 70s, where I got friends, and then from then on, early 90s, we start exchanging letters with people, punks overseas, and then we got the fanzine, and then this band start forming, and it's like this. And now it's like that because if you want to see overseas band or foreign band playing KL, you can't until about the early 2000s. You know, I did a show for Fugazi in 1996, but that was very, very rare. But after that, by about 2000 something, more and more bands came from the US and everywhere. So the thing, what I'm saying is like, when I wrote here, 2010s and now, crazy times because there's so many. Every week there be shows and shows and shows, different places and everything. What I'm saying is like, it comes to a point where you have to choose where you want to go. Back then, it's like, okay, when's the next show? It's like, oh, next week, okay. You know, nowadays you have to look at the flyer, which one I would go, you know, because there's so much happening. And it's everywhere in Malaysia. And as a part of the DIY punk rock scene and also the metal scene, is very tight. The network with people in Bangkok, people in Jakarta, in Bandung, in Manila, so Singapore. So it's like this network of really, really good friends. And then so let's say you're from US, you want to play somewhere. So these guys can get together. Okay, you play in Jakarta first, then you go Bandung, and after that you go to Singapore, then you go to KL, play in Penang, then go to Sabah. All these things, you know, it can be done. And that's been happening since the mid-2000s. Okay, I think I better stop now, and then if you guys want to ask questions. All right, thank you so much for coming and all that. There are some songs there that you can, I digitized and put there taken from demo tapes from the 90s, a lot of them from the 90s, early 90s actually. Some of the recording is really, really crap, but still very, very important. So I think there's about 20 songs or more. Yeah? 29. So yeah. Why 29? No, why not 30? All right, so if you guys want to ask me questions.
各位有没有什么问题要问 Joki？
How long has it been? How long have we been talking? Almost 2 hours. Oh, you guys should have told me, man.
So I got two questions. One is some of the things you had mentioned. I agree with you that the death of MySpace was maybe one of the most harmful things for bands because I don't think there has been a better social media platform for music since then. But there are, like Maximum Rock and Roll, what you said was the Bible of punk rock, and those zines and blogs and forums are still well and active. Do they?
It's not printing anymore.
I think that just ended maybe in the last year.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah.
And then about a month ago, they have given, because I tell you this, Maximum Rock and Roll, the magazine or fanzine for DIY punk and more kind of like underground punk, started somewhere in 82, and they closed down maybe last year. But anyway, they print out every month, and it's like full on crazy, whatever you want to get in touch with. Anyway, last 2 weeks I heard, because when you send the records to them for them to review, when you send records to Maximum Rock and Roll for them to review, they will keep the records. And the law was you send 2 copies. One is for them to review, the other one is for them to keep. So since beginning 1982 until now, until the last few years, they had the biggest collection, the biggest collection of punk rock of whatever form in the world. And last week or 2 weeks ago, they were given to a university because they cannot handle it anymore. So they given to a university, I think Minnesota or something, I can't remember. Yeah. Yeah, university. Because it's the same thing, the archive of a lot of the Washington DC hardcore scene is now with the Washington DC University. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, because it seems like a lot of that influence from Maximum Rock and Roll and those areas was more prominent in the 80s and 90s, but Maximum Rock and Roll is starting to do a lot more, not only DIY punk, but they do lots of eclectic, like local underground stuff too. Has any of that, I guess, in the last 10 years also penetrated the Malaysian underground scene, or is it mostly, I guess, in this realm of DIY punk?
In terms of the ones that I mentioned just now, 97, 98, around where the more DIY punk kind of started to rear and then do their thing, the magazine, the fanzine that they were reading is not, I mean, yeah, we read Maximum Rock and Roll, but you got, what is this Crush fanzine from Portland? Can't remember the name now. And there's a few more. There was a hardcore-based fanzine from New York, but have that really kind of dogmatic idea about punk in that sense. Yeah, so not just Maximum Rock and Roll become a bit dodgy after a while. There's certain, like people who are like, it's too diverse. After Timothy died, the original editor, he died. And then after that, it kind of like lost a bit of the plot, but it come back again, this thing. But it's always been a very important way of connecting and networking. And they also have a booklet that they put out every 6 months. It's called Buy Your Own something, can't remember. And inside there, you have all the addresses. Let's say Hong Kong. There might be Lenny from Blackbird, So like Indonesia, who it is that you could shoot contact, and in KL it was me and my friends and all these things. I can't remember what it's called again, but it's like a networking for punk. And sometimes I would have people knocking on my door and say, "Hey Joe, I read about you in that Maximum Rock and Roll." I say, "Okay," so they come in. So yeah, so that's how it works. Even when I travel, I immediately have places to stay, like crazy, just like that, because it's such a, how to say, the thing. I mean, the term was a network of friends. Yes, yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. Based on what you had said, especially the beginning, like when rock and roll was becoming really famous in Malaysia, it seemed that just Asia in general, Malaysia was kind of an aberration, was really more unique in the way that punk and those things became prominent and very successful. Do you think that, I guess, what set Malaysia apart from the rest? Is it because of all the propaganda, anti-punk just gave it the free publicity it needed, or was it something else?
Okay, two things. I have to say, first of all, in terms of Southeast Asia, the first punk scene is was in Manila, in the Philippines. They started very early. 1979, they have the Jerks, the first punk. For me, the first punk band in the whole Southeast Asia. But anyway, beside the point. And us, I think, I was asked a question in 1992 when during an interview with a Singaporean broadcasting radio by this friend of mine, Chris Ho, and he asked me, why is it that you have punk happening in the East Coast, in the state of Terengganu? And at that point, you don't really think about it because you just got into it, you love it, and then and you never really think as a somebody who's a punk, you don't really think why I become this, But that become a question later on, of course, because people start studying it. People want to see why and all these things. And I will attempt to answer in some ways. I think punk, for me, the most important part about punk is not so much about the music or the fashion or all this. It's the self-empowerment that it gives you, because it tells you that you can do this. You can do whatever you want to do. Do it, man, and don't rely on anyone. So that, for me, is the main gist of it all. And for me also, it doesn't matter if you want to be a big, rich rock star, whatever. Just do, because you are actually doing what you want to do in that sense. I might not agree with what you're doing, but that's your right. I'm not the one who pay for your rent anyway. So what I'm saying is like, a lot of people, young people who were involved in this thing, was somehow touched and self-empowered enough to write their own song, to go out and do and be themselves and learn and keep learning and all these things. The rest is, just, flowers, like the band, the music, the gigs, all of that, getting, friends and all that. But personal empowerment is so, so, so important, especially for people like me who come from such a conservative area which doesn't really allow you to think that much. You can't even say when you're young, they're teaching you the Quran in Arabic, and you say, what does it mean? No, you don't need to know that. You just kind of like learn how to read it without knowing what it's all about. And so yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is, it also asks you to really know, and to know, you have to ask questions. And sometimes you have to be rude about it, but you have to ask questions. And this goes on throughout everything in your life, from the political side of things, from your daily day-to-day, whatever. And I believe that is always relevant in terms of punk being that, that seed, Yeah.
Hi, I'm actually also from Malaysia.
Oh.
And
Hello.
actually, my master studies is highly related to the 1980s in Malaysia. So I'm curious about something maybe not directly related to music, but
Right.
there is actually a group called themselves Punk Kid. From my reading about the 1980s, there is a group called themselves Punk Kid, which apparently derived from the word punk kid. And it actually refers to a masculine group of women.
No, it doesn't. It's not really punk. It's actually punk kid.
Yeah, I know. But some sort of records that I read suggesting that it is derived from the word punky. So what I'm trying to ask is that, are there this kind of masculine women being visible in the underground scene that you were living in?
Oh, yeah.
Are they involved, or they just they are influenced by the trendy kind of appearance of the punk? So they try to mimic or copy the wearing style and try to be cool.
Okay, first of all, the term punk kid refers to masculine women, masculine female, which could also be gay, or even transgender. And that word is usually being used as a derogatory word by the public most of the time. You punk kid, It's like when you are transgender, they call it a pondan, So there's very, very negative connotation to that. In the scene, it is a very interesting question, because when the scene first started out, a lot of girls at the shows and hanging out, they were girlfriends of band members, and they're not necessarily into the music or the culture. But there was one girl who turned up somewhere around 89, 1990, who actually climb the walls of her college just to go see the shows. And she has, no interest in anyone there. She just want to go see the shows, Her name's Fizzy. She has put out 2 films now. Filmmaker and director, really, really awesome. An artist also. She did the first fanzine that come from a woman, from a female in the scene. She also performed in a band called Shine O Mine, all girl band, and also later on Kenanga Oren. And she is now writing her 3rd film, I think, 3rd or 4th film. So yeah, that's one. And then later on, about the mid-90s, you got these boys, we decided to do all kind of like a girl gig, but it's very hard to find all girl bands. So so as long as there's a female in the band, okay, fine. So, so that was done at Piccadilly. I think it was 95, 96. So there's a band from Singapore called Psychosonic. I don't know, you know, Psychosonic is like one of the first punk band, all-girl punk band in Singapore. And throughout the years, it getting more and more and more. And I wouldn't say that they are kind of like butch women. I mean, some of them are just normal. But they, the interesting point is these girls who are wearing the tudung, you know, who are singing in hardcore punk bands, you know. And that is for me something else. That's just, you know. So, and also there was this band called the Hell Sister. Hell Sister. So Hell Sister was all girl. And the singer, if I'm not mistaken, her name was Colleen. She was studying at the Islamic University. And now she's a lawyer. She's a successful lawyer. But she told me, I mean, we know this, that she would go to gigs, all right? And at the gig, you will see her mohawk, pink, you know, with all this lipstick and all this thing, you know what I mean? But then she had to go back to the university, you know? So what she told us is she would change on the bus, you know, going there. And she had a few more bands after that, so that's another one. There's a lot, I mean, actually there's a lot now. Yeah, and then there's a few who kind of like fallen off, you know, become, I mean, actually happened to a lot of so-called punk. They become more conservative as they get older. And yeah, so that's the time where I go see them. Hey, I think you got all this cassette, give it to me now. Yeah, no, you don't need that. No? So because this is haram, so give it to me. So anyway, yeah, so that's how there are girls, but I have to say that it's very hard to, I believe, very hard to sustain an all-girl band somehow. But recently there's a band, hardcore band, can't remember something, Last Something. They got married, I mean the guitarist and the singer got married, so the band was off for a while. I think after 5 years they came back, they're back again, they're touring Indonesia and things like this. So yeah. All right.
So thank you for your a lot of information that.
Yeah, I think it's too much, isn't it?
No, not too much, but I think it's because the cultural difference.
Cultural difference.
Yeah, because Asia, Southeast Asia is quite very different from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and that kind of thing. And so your networking is more South Asia. But there are some same question. So I want to ask, can you give me some very quick answer about the first and second generation and the third generation? Because I think if you have to be a punk rocker, you have a lot to ask a lot of questions. Can you give us the example of the continuous same question and different question that the third generation facing, and which is very different from the first and the second generation?
Okay. Yeah. I think the first generation is more about self-empowerment because, you know, at that time, I would say the government just started this new policy, NEP, new economic policy, whereas they were lifting the economic, chances of the Malays, because the Malays were very poor. So back then, you don't see many middle-class Malays. Most of them working class or even the poor, you know. With the modernization of the cities, the people start going to the cities to find work and everything. This started from 70s onward. But also, there was a race riot in 1969, May 13. So that's a very, very famous date. It's like September 11 for us, you know what I mean? May 13, where hundreds of people died. Chinese going against the Malays and the Malays going against the Chinese, and also, you know. But there are also like beautiful stories where, different races help out each other. So, a drama, everything is happening. But from that flashpoint, the government decided to, okay, this could be because of the dissatisfaction among the Malays in the way of their chances to change their economic chances on all these things not doing very well. So the government started NEP, and NEP is supposed to go only for about 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. It's to help the Malays. So what they did was scholarship for the Malays, more funding for this and that, everything actually, to just lift them up from poverty. No, this is late 70s up going to the 80s. Yeah. Okay, and of course, the country become a lot more wealthier by as we were reaching the 90s, and then the program, the NEP, National Economic Policy, was supposed to stop, around 89, somewhere around there. It went on. Even now, still going on. It has been hijacked by the nationalist Malays, who are a part of the government, so they want to keep that going. So even when they're already like middle class or upper middle class, they still want their kids to be financed by the government for universities and things like this, which is wrong, because the money was planned to go to other races after that. Because after that, the criteria is not more about races. It's supposed to be about poor people. But still, it's been used. And this always been the problem in Malaysian politics, because when the Malays become the middle class, then they would be afraid to rock the boat because they are doing quite well. I don't want to do anything to make me go down again, you see. So then they would go with the conservative policies. And one of the the policies that all these political parties who have, especially the Islamist party PAS, or UMNO, which is the Malay party, nationalist party, they would play around with the race kind of ideas. Yeah, the Chinese going to come turn us into like Singapore, where the Malays are, all these things, and that is still going until now. When you talk about the differences in terms of the kids in the underground scene, at that time, like I said, in the 80s, a lot of us I think we lacked confidence, self-confidence at that time, a lot of us. Because, apart from the grooming that been done by our parents or whatever, expectation for us to be this kind of pious, obedient citizen, So for us to have our own voice, to kind of do something and say, oh man, I can do this, then your world suddenly becomes bigger, So that's for the first generation, I think. And the second generation, lack of confidence. Lack of confidence. Not keyakinan tiada keyakinan in Malay. So anyway, the second generation, which is from about 1990 up to, I would say, 95, that area. That era is the kids who are kind of like living off the parents who now have escaped from being in poverty, And they are also being financed by the government to go to universities, to get, all those things, You know what? This is still going, which is very sad. If you're a Chinese and you got really good grades at school, the chances of you being absorbed into the local universities is pretty slim. But if you're Malay, even if your grade is not that great, you get in. So these are the things that's always happening, This is because the people in the rural areas, which mainly Malays, would support such policies that would, kind of like support them, you see. They don't see themselves as Malaysian without the colors and things like that, so it's very hard. Which is why the state where I'm coming from, Terengganu and Kelantan, even the northern one, is still controlled by the conservative Islamist parties.
I think we stop here and leave some time for people to have a drink and take a look at this show.
All right, yeah,
okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you, everyone.